Today we're going to be talking about honing your ability to support teen decision making and decision education. And at DAG back in Denver, we talked about um, values and how we can supercharge our decision making with values. And I'm going to just give you a quick review of our model that Clarity for Action uses for teaching all of our materials. I'm here presenting, joined with Kristen Jawad, who is my co-founder of Clarity for Action. And our focus is really on a person-centered decision-making model. And I want to encourage all of you as decision scientists, as decision analysts, as people in this field, you have a great skill set for really promoting great decision quality. And I want to encourage you that you have what it takes to be able to do this, whether it's with your child or children you connect with, or through a nonprofit or school in your neighborhood. We believe that decision education equips students with the recipe for reducing stress and increasing personal efficacy, and that it's not something that we're seeing taught in schools. So today, we're going to give you insights into decision fitness, which is the next piece of our model. We're going to also help you raise your awareness about the academic calendar and where students really might come upon stumbling blocks. Maybe it's around finals or midterms, maybe it's around college choice or class choice. So being available to students during those higher stress times is really helpful. And we're going to give you specific tips that are going to help kind of calm them down and help them really think through that when they're under duress. And then we'll offer you other helpful tips. So our model is a whole person integrated decision-making system. And it happens to spell the word VIDA. So it's values, which is the core motivation for any decision. My internal operating system, it's how does our brain work? How does our system work that we're walking around with that actually influences our decision making? The decision process, which would be also called decision quality. And many of you are well steeped in that process. And then action. So how can young people take action in order to have a successful end to their decision process? So values, which we talked about at DAG, was really who am I? What are my values? What motivates me? If I'm connected to my decision making and it's in alignment with what I care about, then it's a lot easier for me to follow all the way through to action. I have seen it over and over again with young people. The kids who feel like the phone weighs 5,000 pounds and they can't possibly pick it up, who have a decision about contacting an admissions office or talking to a counselor at school or whatever it might be, all of a sudden when they say, wait, I have a value that's connected to this decision, suddenly they're able to pick up the phone without prompting. So it's really amazing how kids can get stuck. Anybody can get stuck. If you can't take action, my first place that I look is, did we connect to what their values and what they care about? It's also about preferences. What trade-offs do I care about? What are my preferences as a person? And really anchoring to that as well. And also, what are personal strengths? Everybody has their own style for learning, their own way of interacting with the world. So how can we play to our strengths? And that's where we build resilience, is through playing to our strengths. The next section, which is what we'll be focusing on today, is my internal operating system. This is things like my brain and my habits. We actually can, there are actually techniques for taking a decision and turning it into a habit so it's automatic, and it takes a lot less brain energy and effort. But you first need to have the intention to set a policy for yourself, and for young people to understand how their brain works is really important to understanding how things are tricking them, like cognitive biases, how they can be influenced in unconscious ways. There's also emotional regulation and self-care. Does anybody remember a moment in high school when they weren't just tired or feeling various emotions or stress or those kinds of things? Certainly high school students can be in a situation where they're in flow, they feel good about what they're doing, but there's just so much going on and so much that's new because they actually don't know what they don't know. And they don't have the life experience to be able to pull from to understand a decision situation in the same way we do. They've only had maybe 14 or 15 years on the planet Earth. So to just have insight into that emotional regulation and self-care piece is really important. They also, as a part of that, fear, anxiety, and risk. Some are really risky, some are terrified of risk. And also the notion of self-reflection. When you have self-reflection, a lot of people will beat themselves up. But really in a self-reflection state, it's actually learning. So taking the pressure off and saying, how did that go? What worked? What didn't work? I'm so glad you learned. Let's move forward and apply it again. The third step is the decision process, right? It's decisions versus outcomes. This is radical. Anybody I talk to about decisions versus outcomes, you'll explain it to them and they'll say, oh, okay, so if I did really poorly on a test, I made a bad decision. I'm like, no, let's start over. That even adults struggle with this idea of make a decision and then let it go. Also thinking about my preferences and possibilities, kind of aligning your mind and your heart in your decision-making process. We have a really nice tool that actually asks questions to both mind and heart so that you get a really balanced, robust decision, even as you go through decision quality. And then having the ability to evaluate and weigh your choices. And finally, there's action. Nobody, even the best planner, the best manager was not born with those skills well honed. So I think a lot of times we say, great, you made a great decision, go do it. But really young people need just skills and time management and practical tools that are relevant to how they learn. So if you have somebody who's an auditory learner or a visual learner or kinesthetic learner, their tracking of time, the tools that they would use, all are influenced by how they actually experience the world. So you might have somebody who wants an app on their phone that shows their calendar in color. You might have somebody who actually needs a file folder to hold important information or something on their wall. You might have somebody who needs to be able to doodle all over the sides of their planner. It's not that they're lazy. They actually know themselves that doodling for somebody who's kinesthetic actually makes them remember better what they're learning and doing. So having compassion in taking action and really trying out tools that play to our strengths again really helps improve your action and the quality of the follow through in your decision. But also in action, it improves communication. You practice self-accountability and you become more proactive versus reactive. So the more that you can kind of create policies, the more you can be successful in executing on a decision process, the more resilient you become in being proactive instead of just reactive. Now let's just unpack the internal operating system a little bit more. It's funny we talk about this with computers, but actually as human beings, we have this human body that is our internal operating system. And specifically for teenagers, their brains are absolutely under construction. So thinking about cognitive biases that make the invisible visible, I cannot tell you the number of times we've taught classes where students sit back and they say, people are tricking me. I'm like, yeah, and you're tricking yourself. But to just raise the awareness of how marketers are targeting teens, how our society, how even parents, without knowing it, are presenting biases in even how they ask a question. A classic question is, are you going to go to college when you graduate, or are you going to get a job? Well, there are about 1,000 things a student could do in between those two things, but that is presented as an either or bias. So to understand that the student has the power to say, well, what else? Breaks free of that thinking, that either or thinking that is so prevalent. Also, emotional state matters. So this is part of decision fitness, is what we call that, is if I'm in a compromised state emotionally, my decision fitness goes way down. And to be even have the permission to say I'm not fit to make a decision is pretty spectacular. As a parent, my one of my sons will come see me at 2 a.m. I have a policy that they can talk to me anytime and say, I've got to make a decision. And I will, out of a groggy sleep, say, I'm happy to talk to you about this decision you need to make. However, I need you to think about making the decision tomorrow, because I'm not fit and you're not fit. So now that we've practiced that a lot, I'll say, I'm so mad, or I'm stressed, or whatever. And they literally will say to me, we could talk about that, but you can't make a decision right now because you're not fit. So it can come back to bite you, but it's actually great. The other thing is that we'll be talking about the internal operating system is, there is a cognitive overload that people experience. So the more we are bombarded by choice, the more we're bombarded by information, creates overload. We see a spike in teen anxiety and depression, medicating students for unbelievable stress. They're in a state of constant cognitive overload. So using the decision pyramid tool really helps kind of put all that information outside their own brain on a piece of paper so they can let it go and really see where they need to focus their energy now, and congratulate them on the areas they've successfully decided, and then say, let's just put these other things in the parking lot. And also, once again, young people don't know what they don't know. And so we can actually help with life experience and calm questions for them that help them really focus their decision and be successful. So many of you know cognitive biases. For young people, they certainly can be dangerous, and they're also common, right? We talked about either or already. The availability bias, I love this cartoon. The problem for young people is what's available to them is social media. They're getting a kind of a narrow view. They have social media. They have what's sensationalized in the news, what their friends have to say. It's actually a fairly narrow scope. And so they're not thinking differently. They're not getting other opinions about that. Autopilot. I actually know children who have done this, where they've walked into a poll on their cell phone. But there's plenty of other sort of status quo biases where maybe they're in a situation that they're not happy with, but they continue to be in that situation because they can't see another option. Bandwagon, for sure, for teens. If your friends jumped off a bridge, would you? But those can also be more subtle bandwagon about making bad choices about maybe whether to do your homework, or because my friends are out doing some fun thing, or whether to skip class, or whether to just not worry about something, even if we care about it, because the other people in our lives don't care about it, that maybe we go along with it. It's also used by marketers. Everybody's doing that. Why don't you wear these tennis shoes that cost $200? And then, of course, there's the overconfidence bias. Because young people don't know what they don't know, they really struggle with overconfidence, that they can't see the negative thing that could happen, and they haven't experienced enough negative things that could happen to realize that they have overconfidence. Love this comic, The Sunk Cost Effect. I don't know if you know any people who have those little heart necklaces, and one half goes to your best friend and one half you have, and then you're a whole heart together. And maybe you gave that to your best friend at, 8 years old. And now your best friend is actually a really toxic or negative influence on you. But you're like, well, they have the other half of my heart and they're so important to me. And I've invested all this time into this friendship. And yes, friendships are very important, but sometimes they can be damaging. And so that notion of I've invested all this time into this friendship and not realizing that how negative it can be gets you off track. And finally, there's the confirmation bias, because we all know the earth is flat. It's amazing how our internet searches actually play into confirmation bias. I have a friend who's at Microsoft Research, and a few years ago he talked about how they were looking at searches, and search engines are so great because they look at you and they say, oh, this person is excited about this, I'm going to give them more. So one example we use in class is the Second Amendment. Everybody talks about the Second Amendment. And say I'm doing a research paper and I put into my search engine that Second Amendment issues. And then the first one I click on is gun rights. Very controversial, right? And there are people on all sides of the issue. My search engine just said, wait, she wants more about gun rights, not about gun control. So suddenly I'm moving further each time I search. I'm moving further and further out and further out to one side of the issue, to where I think living in a bunker in Idaho with a bunch of guns and ammo might be normal. And same on the other side. I might think, police activity that's extreme is normal. It's like the normal is sort of somewhere in the middle, but that we're pulled to the sides by our searches. So we actually talk to our students about how can you fight this confirmation bias just by your search engine. You can search privately so that it doesn't know what you've looked for before, or erase history. You can do a lot of things to actually get more centralized information. You can also go to your public library because they're going to have you have more choice about what books you pick up. And somebody is not filtering that. So at Microsoft, they're finding that our internet is actually pulling us to different sides. So an interesting societal outcome from the confirmation bias. The other thing I wanted to just talk to you about, there's some great tools out there. The Alliance for Decision Education used to be called How I Decide, and they're moving from a decision education provider to a field catalyst. So they're funding people like us and other nonprofits. They're funding research. They're advocating including decision education into public education. So they're trying to really catalyze the field to really make forward movement happen. So there are some links in the slide deck that we'll be sending you, but I've put in the links to understand who they are, what they're doing, because it's really interesting work. There are also a couple of resources because they do house sort of like best practices and different tools that are available for free. So Mindful Choices is one. It's a series of videos we've used in our classroom before. And HabitWise is another one. Some great teaching materials, just great for raising awareness about different aspects of your internal operating system. So we've included those as well. And recently they just funded a great cognitive bias video. We're partnering with an organization called the Rikers Center, and we have students writing and producing and filming an activated video game for us to use in our classroom to make a more activated learning experience for our students. So they're a pretty amazing organization, so check them out. So there's a couple of great just reminders that you can use anywhere with anybody. And one is HALT, which is HALT if I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So we encourage young people and anybody really to recognize a decision fit state as calm, focused, and ready. And so if I have one of my kids show up saying, I'm really mad, I will say, hey, when's the last time you ate? And I start cooking something while they kind of spill it, and then they have a snack. And then it's amazing how kind of calmness comes to the world again. So you can have a snack. Call it out when people are unfit to decide. If they're lonely, you can really encourage them to connect with somebody who cares about them. So it could be you, it could be somebody else, but maybe their best friend, or maybe they just need to go out and have some fun. That actually helps their decision fit state. And also the notion of if they're tired, take a break and come back. Just to do that decision fitness check-in and have that practice turns it into a habit, which is automatic. And that's our hope, is to really bring awareness and then create habits for these young people and for ourselves. So in education, they use the zones of regulation. And this is kind of what that looks like, right? So if you see the green zone is really happy, calm, ready to learn, ready to decide, focused, content. And we actually spend time with our students just talking about, what does it feel like to be in the green zone? What's that like for you? Where are you? Maybe they're by themselves, just relaxing. Maybe they're in a big group. Whatever that looks like, what helps them stay in the green zone? Drink water, eat regularly, get good sleep. Whatever that feels like for them is great. That's our goal, is the green zone. None of us live in the green zone all the time, at all. The other zones are zones that we can end up in or be in, which is fine and part of the human experience. But how do we help ourselves get back to the green zone so we can be more productive? So the yellow zone would be frustrated, anxious, afraid, jealous, silly, nervous. So what kinds of support do they need when they're in the yellow zone to help them get back to the green zone? Maybe it's deep breaths. Maybe it's talking it out. Whatever it might be, going for a walk. It doesn't matter what the thing is. They know themselves. And that's why it's person-centered decision-making, because my tricks for these things are not necessarily their tricks. I would have ideas, but it's really what works for them. And to understand what it feels like to be in that state, or how they want to be supported. Then there's the blue zone, which is sad, tired, sick, bored, or disappointed. And once again, like, what do they need to get out of the blue zone? What helps? Listening to music, reading a book, whatever it might take to get back to the green zone. And finally, there's the red zone. The red zone, when we are so mad or angry or out of control or exhilarated. Who hasn't seen somebody in a new relationship who is out of control, exhilarated about being with somebody? They're not actually decision fit. Terrified, devastated. This is actually the zone where almost anybody who's in this zone needs help getting out of. It's for an adult as well. It's really hard to get out of this zone without having somebody saying, hey, let's take a break, or some external support. it's not that you can't get out of it. All of these zones, we can always be moving towards the green zone. But this is a tool of awareness to say, where am I really? It's another just tool for self-regulation and for self-reflection for decision fitness. So I've just included some tips so that you can kind of go back to this list. What would support you in staying or getting back into the green zone? So ask that. Recognize the signs that someone is not emotionally regulated. And I think it's important to do it without judgment and to do it with curiosity, like, hey, what's going on for you? And remember, when we were little kids, we had tantrums. Everybody did, right? And as we aged, we learned not to flip our lid in public. But that actually doesn't mean that's not happening or that people aren't flipping out. So a student might show up with really subtle cues saying, I don't know, or just only offering teeny hints about like confusion, that they're actually freaking out inside. So be aware of the people you're talking to and keep this in mind, that they could actually be really freaking out. So asking probing questions is helpful. You don't need to be a therapist. You just need to be aware and supportive. A great movie actually about emotional regulation is Inside Out, because it has these characters that manifest the different emotional states in the character's brain, and that these characters are having interactions in this person's brain. And it's a very fun movie, and but it gives you really great insight into emotional regulation and the different things that are going on. So what can help a lot, even when somebody's freaked out, is to just say, let's step back for a minute and let's just fill this up. Let's fill up this pyramid and say, what decisions have you already made? What policies do you have? What have you already decided? And really congratulate them on the things they've decided. And then parsing it out into the different levels of, what might I decide in the future, or will I decide? Because these are possibilities at the bottom. You're not definitely going to decide these things, but then really putting the energy into, what am I deciding now? And what makes sense for me to focus on? We do an exercise in our class with Post-its, and we have a giant pyramid, and we have the kids write down a decision that they feel ready to make, a decision that they kind of feel ready to make, and then decisions they're not ready to make. And then they go and put them into this pyramid and say, wow, there are decisions I am totally not ready to make that I have to decide now. And that's really, really powerful, because then they say, wait, I need some help. And that's actually where we can come alongside students and say, here are some great techniques for you. Here's some great things to help you feel better about the decision and more prepared for making the decisions. And that's, of course, where we put in decision quality. So I would encourage all of you to get involved. There's so much you have to offer as a decision professional, and there's so much you can do individually in your daily life to just practice these skills. And there are ways you can also get involved in your community. Some ideas that we have is just have one-on-one conversations with youth in your life, really with anybody in your life. Maybe you have an emerging adult in your household like I do, that continuing these conversations hones their skills, but it also hones your skills. Other experiences that you could get involved with is partner with us for a one-day workshop. We could come in and we can do a one-day workshop, or some variety of, 2 half days, whatever that is, to give a primer to young people about this. We also do parenting classes, right? You could encourage people to attend our parenting webinars. You could participate in our Train the Trainer online course is another option. And you can also always reach out to us with any questions that you have. We're available. We're a nonprofit. We're available. This is why we exist, is to really help you be part of that decision education revolution so that we can have the next generation be more robust decision makers than ever.